So a child Sahabi said about Rasulullah ما منعني من القول مع رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إلا هؤلاء رجال أسن مني. Nothing prevented me from going up to and speaking with the Prophet except that there were individuals there that were of greater status or seniority to me. So this child had access to the Prophet at any given moment to go and to speak with the most important man on the face of the planet, the most busiest man on the face of the planet, right? Like, if you think you're busy, the Prophet is 10 times busy, a million times, exponentially times busier than you, right? And he had the opportunity and the ability for the child to go to the Prophet and to speak with him. But here's a nuanced point of adab. There was also social adab and norms, meaning that the child knew through instruction and context that you don't just walk up to him when there's Abu Bakr there, for example. When Umar is having a conversation with him, you wait, but if he's free, then you go up to him and you can speak to him or you can engage him. A Sahabi said, ask the Prophet who is the most who's the most beloved person to you? And what did he say? Aisha radiallahu anha. And then the person's heart broke. And they thought, oh, well, you know, okay, fine, I understand. That's among the women folk. But what about the men? And then he said, Abu Bakr. And he said, okay, I can understand that. Abu Bakr, you know, he's the senior Sahabi. And he said, okay, what about after him? Umar. What about after him? Uthman. He said, okay, that's enough. I don't want to hear anymore. But what we want to take away from this is that what was incredible is that everybody who spoke to the Prophet ﷺ felt that they were the most important person to him. Right? That's what was so profound about his character. That he faced you when he spoke. He didn't remove his hand before you removed your hand. And that he inquired about your condition and your situation. Right? Like going up to children. For example, the brother of Anas bin Malik, who had lost his bird, his pet bird, he says to him, Ya Aba Umair, ma fa'ala al-Umayr, play on words. He says, oh Abu Umair, what happened to your bird? This bird called Umayr, what happened to him? And he knows that the fuqaha takes 70 ahkam out of this one interaction, one of which is that you can ask a question that you already know the answer to. But this is a way of relating to the children, right? And so when we talk about musahaba or sohba, it's this. But also I'd like to extend another layer to it, and that is that children are soaking up and interpreting their world based upon the way you explain the world to them. So for example, in your household, if you're always complaining, okay, if you're always glass half empty, right? What did the Prophet say? He said what? Compare in the dunya with those who are less than you, right? And in the akhirah, compare with those who have more than you. Why? It's a psychological nuance. The more you look at people less than you, you have gratitude for what you have, and you don't chase them. Those, when you look at deen, you look at more pious people, you want to become more pious, you feel deficient. And you chase deen, right? But the question is, how is that conversation happening at work, at the house? If a person loses their job, do they panic? If they have a relationship problem, do they start complaining about the person and backbiting at home? You know, when they are tried by something that they're denied, like your evening tea, for example, and you're making a big fuss about it, right? Well, that's a man baby, right? it's a baby in the body of a man or a woman that's essentially reacting impulsively while you're turning to your child and you're saying, don't have a fuss when you're not allowed to have your ice cream or your cake before your food, for example. So how much of what's the conversation that you're having at home? Is it about bills? Oh, how are you going to pay the bills? Where's the tawakkul in that? Right? How do you deal with hardship? What is your response? Is it chaotic? Or is it, inshallah, things will be okay? Trust in the hikmah and wisdom of Allah. These are the things that we're trying to talk to children about. We want to be talking to children about so that we can teach them to emotionally self-regulate. But to be consistent with the teachings that we're actually giving them is to actually put them in implementation and practice. The Prophet ﷺ, Abdullah ibn Abbas, for example, was 13 years old when the Prophet ﷺ passed away, and he became the biggest mufassir among the Sahaba. So senior Sahaba are coming to Abdullah ibn Abbas, a child, for the tafsir. But the Prophet ﷺ made dua for him. Teach him understanding of deen and give him an understanding of its meanings, interpretations. But he narrates a story. These are the emotional memories of what the Prophet said. He says that when I was a child, and I used to go to Maymuna myself, who was a relative of his, the wife of the Prophet, and I would sleep over. And one of the Prophet, he get up, he describes it. He says, he get up in the middle of the night. He didn't know what he was doing. He was a child, right? He gets up in the middle of the night, so I just kept with him, just follow him. Then he'd go over to the bucket where he had his water, and he'd make wudu. So he'd just make wudu with him. Then he'd stand for salah. And then the kid would stand in salah with him on the wrong side. And so the Prophet wraps him around on the other side while he's praying. These are memories that the Sahaba are having of the Prophet, and then they're relating them to others, but they're also experiencing it for their own selves, right? Anas bin Malik spent 10 years with the Prophet ﷺ, from 10 to 20, and he lived to be past 100 years old. And he says that he did not spend a day in his life after the passing of the Prophet ﷺ without seeing him in his dreams. Okay? So this was the type of relationship that he had with the Prophet ﷺ in a memorable way. And he said that Anas bin Malik said that I never had an incident where the Prophet ﷺ scolded me for something. He never said, why did you do this? Why did you do this? Doesn't mean he didn't redirect me. Sometimes this is a deep wisdom. You tell a child, why did you do that? They're a child, they don't know why they did that. They just impulsively did it. Right? The better question is, or the response is, what can you do differently? Okay? Or how can you do things differently? Right? And the incident of the Prophet ﷺ is that when Anas bin Malik narrates that he was playing, and the Prophet ﷺ told him, take care of this responsibility for me. He said, okay, no problem. And then he goes off, and on the way, he finds some other kids to play with, and he starts playing. And the Prophet then later on, he looks back and he sees the Prophet and then he says, and the Prophet is smiling. And he says, Anas, he said, did you stop by where I told you to stop by? He didn't scold him, like, why didn't you do this? Or why did you do this? He said, did you stop by where I told you to stop by? He said, I'm going now, right? This is a reminder, so it kicks him into motion. Right? And so these are sort of these relational points that become really profound for children if we really kind of focus on developing not only the relationship but also the lived experience with children. So I pray that Allah Ta'ala give us some tawfiq and the hikmah to be able to work with our children in a way that makes them love the deen, be good people, give them both this dunya and the akhirah, and to be representatives of good character, representatives of the deen, to draw people to it and to make them love it as well. What we'll do is we'll just transition into questions here from the floor. Anybody have any questions? Please feel free. Yeah.
So one thing we were talking about earlier was you got me considered in that role and that tantrum that happened. So I feel like one of the shifts that happened from this generation of parenting to the last one was this sort of constant need to make our kids happy and please them and be their friends and say yes to everything. So So like, why did that shift happen, and how do we sort of counter it?
Yeah. So, I don't think, I'll speak and then I'll hand it off to you, inshallah. But, so that's a very bad idea, first of all, to just give your child anything. And it's actually generated the sense of lack of resilience in the new generation where individuals are just sort of impulsive and they don't know how to deal with trials and tribulations, right? It's helicopter parenting. It's parenting that sort of tries to baby-proof their entire lives, but that's not going to happen. And then what you do is you get society to try to baby-proof the entire society for you so that, nowadays, the feedback you give on an assignment, you have to be really encouraging, or you have to give people high fives for getting a C plus or something like that. That's not the way that you need to be dealing with your children. Quite the contrary. The contrary is that Imam al-Ghazali, when he get a chance to go through this a lot, is that he says you need to develop resilience in children, meaning that you need to help them go through struggle. Meaning, like Imam al-Ghazali, for example, very explicitly says that give your children good food one day and then give them dry bread the next day. Because individuals, when they become addicted to these things, they don't have the ability to appreciate beauty in its natural form. They become hooked. And the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ is, أكيد يسمى ذلك نفسه وعمل بما بعد الموت. And then والعاجز من أتبع نفسه هواه وتمنى على الله. The ajiz, very interesting. So the intelligent one is a person who subdues their nafs and works towards the akhirah. And then the unintelligent one is not unintelligent, sorry, it's ajiz, the debilitated one, the handicapped one, okay, is the one who makes their nafs follow their desires, and then they delude themselves that they're doing something good, right? Or that they're waiting for mercy from Allah, or to be given something, okay? I have, for example, I had a patient who had gone on Hajj, and he came back, and he's a very privileged individual, right? I said, how was the Hajj? He said, kind of sounds bad to say this, but, it's just, I was kind of glad it's over. I was like, what? Why? And he said, it was hot, the hotel wasn't the way that I wanted it to be, I had to walk a lot, there was a lot of crowding, and then it was like, you missed the whole experience of it for these little struggles. Do you see what I'm saying? And so the lack of resiliency develops in individuals an inability to actually appreciate anything whenever there's some minor struggles along the way. So one has to develop the resiliency. Now, why did it happen? I think it's become a socio-political phenomenon, like the sort of waves of postmodernism and feminism and meism and me culture and and all of that, and has sort of generated this notion of going to another extreme, of really trying to pamper children. Now the other extreme is into kind of harsh, disconnected parenting. For every action, there's a reaction, and I think we are a people of moderation. Right? To say it's very important to love and connect and to be very positive and develop your children, but to love them doesn't mean that you don't punish them and set limits on them. It's a combination of both. But when you punish them, you don't punish them because you feel like they disrespected you, or that you have an emotional breakdown and that you need to respond, but because it's for their good development, right? You believe that if I do this, this will be in their best interest. You may not even be mad. But you say, but I need to yell at this kid, just so they appreciate the gravity of the situation, but don't yell all the time. If you do, then the child won't take you seriously. They just think this guy is or woman is just a loose cannon. They just yell at everything and just starts tuning you out. It's just a background noise. It's nothing serious anymore, right?
Any questions on the sister's side? Comments, concerns? Sure. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Intuition. Right. Right. Yes. Right. Important. Right. Yes. Wonderful. Yeah. Exactly. Affected by it. Yes. Jazakallah khair. Jazakallah khair. Jazakallah khair. Did the brothers hear some of that a little bit? Okay. Okay, I'll come back to you. Yes. Go ahead. Who was the? Yes. Go ahead. Madhya. Yeah. Right. Very mindful. Yeah. Right. Very true. Yes. Very true. Jazakallah khair.
What's the impact of children character if they are educated in a public school or in Islamic school? Because Islamic schools are very expensive, not everyone can afford that. So, does it really affect a lot of the children in this
It's a big answer. I don't know. Yeah, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Yeah, this is like a question to a big problem, right? So what's the impact of, say, children's character development on people going to Islamic schools versus book schools? Look, I think what we've been trying to express over time is that it's really important that it starts at home, first of all. But then, and then by extension, there's a community. Meaning there needs to be a community around them. And social environments that we place our children are going to have drastic impacts on their development. Okay? So there's no direct answer that I can say to that because a lot of that is complicated by what school, who their teachers are, the personality of the child and their resilience, the capacity and competence or ability to compensate for absence of certain things if the child goes to public school. But I will say it's not easy, right? I mean, I think it would be sort of challenging to assume that, we would hand our children over to non-Muslims to teach them values and character. It's tough, meaning that, it's not an ideal scenario. But that's not to say that it's exclusionary either, meaning like, I think that's for every family member to have that conversation, to talk about, or the family to consider where their school is, what neighborhood they live in, what the teachers are like, what they can do to compensate for it. I mean, sometimes in certain circumstances, people just don't have a choice, right? Like meaning, okay, you don't have capacity to homeschool because both of you are working. You don't have the capacity to be able to to soccer school, and so you're kind of stuck, and maybe you're put in a position where you have to put your kid in a public school. But I would say that you should take caution, and I would say that one should really think carefully about where your children go to school. I mean, in the U.S., for example, it's all school district based, right? So everybody, they move their whole entire families to neighborhoods based upon schools, right? That's how serious people take their school district. People will go out to a suburb, they'll pay extra property taxes or whatever somewhere to be in a particular school district. Or they'll choose a particular school district where they have more of a conservative orientation, but not so conservative that they're racist, for example, right? So you may go to a school, for example, I don't know, where there's predominantly Muslims and you have Muslim teachers. Maybe that's a better choice for the child as opposed to, being in a hyper, liberal sort of setting or environment where children are being taught to be pampered and normalize, things that are inconsistent with our values and beliefs. But I would definitely say that it should be raising alarms in our minds for us, and we should really, we shouldn't just take it as a casual thing. We should really sit down and have a very thorough analysis and discussion about where children need to be going to school, or where we should put our children into school. I mean, in some cases, I know that, for example, in private schools, some people might choose, Jesuit schools in the U.S., for example, that are more religious, conservative leaning, that really focus on character development too. And these may be options for Muslims, because they may be emphasizing sort of family values and ethics and sacrifice and selflessness and perseverance and all these virtues that we've been talking about. Those might be some potential options. I don't know, but one would have to do research on what's out there and what's available. No problem.
Good questions off of her. So from a research perspective, so some studies have shown that it is just unequivocally, just really, really important, especially for dads to be involved in their daughters' lives. So we see that absent dads, and by absent I don't mean they're never home, but just even just your I guess kind of when we grew up, alhamdulillah, my dad was always there, but just the general like the Desi dad, I'm gonna call on Desi dads here. Just go to work, come back from work, where's dinner, watch some news, go to sleep, how was your day, fine, that's it. So that kind of parenting, it has been linked, especially in girls, with lower levels of self-worth, lower levels of self-esteem, confidence issues, increased use in social media, and also a higher chance of getting into premarital relationships, and especially premarital or teen pregnancy. So it's actually quite an intense correlation. Again, these are not causations. It's not like your dad doesn't talk to you, these things will happen. But overall, it shows that there are detrimental effects. So both mom and dad should be involved. On the flip side, studies show that when mothers are not involved, or when they're overly, heavily involved in their sons' lives, that can start to create certain characteristics that perhaps are not desirable for adult roles, for future roles as well, in terms of having being extremely dependent on a female figure, needing a female role model to come and save you from different situations, perhaps modeling too much of feminine types of personalities or traits. So that also, the flip side of overbearing mothers that sometimes happens again in our Pakistani community especially, that can also be problematic. So you don't want to overparent, but you do need both parents as well. I'm just going to answer this. I think when you had asked about the reason for the me culture, there's somebody in our lab doing work on neoliberalism, so he actually suggested, you suggested, postmodernism, neoliberalism as well as a socio-political movement that I'm a brand, I have to like take care of myself first. So this may have also led to a lot of narcissism, which has then led to like, don't respect your teachers, like call everybody out, and you don't have to listen to anyone. I'll always be there to save you. So especially at Islamic schools, we have noticed a lot of bullying between parents and teachers because of this, like my truth and your truth, a lot of this sort of, that my child has to be the best, they can never be wrong, you are wrong. So I just wanted to add one thing to that. Answer your question.
Yeah, just wanted to ask a follow-up question about that. So, there's been a lot written, like Dr. Leonard said, Warren Farrell, about there being a boy crisis, or young men are suffering a lot in today's society, are falling behind. Some of the things you mentioned, as a father of two boys, no girls, like, is that true, and like, what are some tips for countering it?
The question was like the sort of, yeah, I mean, so I hear what you're saying, basically like this idea of like toxic masculinity as maybe become the kind of the buzzword, and so basically you strip the boys of being able to be boys, to be able to demonstrate male oriented characteristics. It's either perceived as aggressive or judgmental or demeaning and patriarchal, right? And I think we really need to kind of push back because this notion of in modernity, like you could say chivalry is dead, right? And so the holding the door open for a female, or helping her like carry her groceries or something, heavy groceries or a big 5-liter bottle of water up the stairs is seen as demeaning somehow. I think we really need to push back on these kinds of ludicrous ideas, and I think we need to use the models of our Sunnah and the Sahaba to show what the Bijat are. I mean, men, I think this is again, every action is a reaction. What they've done is they've taken this notion of, being masculine as being, not involved as a father, as being unemotional, never crying, as being insensitive, as being aggressive, for example. And all of these things, yeah, I mean, these are toxic masculine traits, and we don't see any of this in the Prophet ﷺ, right? And we see a perfect model of a balance of an individual who cries very easily, who serves his family, who is very independent, but takes care of his family at the same time, protects his family, right? Is the leader of his family. And these traits are not mutually exclusive with one another. And I think that's what, the world really needs, is to be shown these examples. And unfortunately, even in our Muslim communities, we lack these, healthy male role models as well. I think we do have, male role models that do embody sort of that detached, unemotional, kind of dictator type of, unconcerned type of, role model or figure that feels like if they brought a paycheck, then their job was basically done in the relationship. Whether it's being a husband or being a father. And so I think we do need to kind of push back, but we need to be careful, where I think we don't need to embrace this kind of neoliberalism idea that, like, we do believe that there is a differentiation between genders. There's a differentiation between gender roles. Now, what that looks like is very flexible in families. It doesn't mean that you need to follow a prototype gender role, but the thing is that there needs to be an acknowledgement or recognition that, there's equity, what we call equity between the genders, not equality. Meaning equity means values the same, they do different roles. Okay, equality means sameness. It's just basically ludicrous. If nobody does it, if you did this in an employment setting, it wouldn't work. If this is a school, it wouldn't work. Everybody's the president of the masjid. It doesn't work, Everybody is the same, the sameness is what's being conflated. And, there's no problem with a woman who's like very, financially savvy and the husband is clueless. Let her take care of the house. You know what I'm saying? manage that there needs to be a discussion in a way that recognizes and acknowledges these things. And I think it's really important for men to feel like men in their households and relationships, to feel like they're respected, they feel like they have a degree of power, a feeling of sense of being able to take care of others and take care of their families, and to be given that, to be given the respect and the opportunities for that. While at the same time, for women to feel valued, to feel like they're a part of the process, to feel like they're an important member of this family that guides and directs where the ship is going. And then there's, domains. What I like to talk about is domains of power. I do this in our marital seminars. There's what we call domains of power. What that means is that rather than this all-powerful idea, like power or no power, right, this false dichotomy, we have this gradients of domains of power, right? For example, somebody is assigned and delegated a task in one particular area. They may be the lead on that and have the final say on it. While the other person may have the same scenario happen in the other direction in a different arena. It could be in the household, it could be in child rearing. They say, look, your say in this arena is limited. And it should be that way because somebody's got to manage that area, right? And they know it well and they're involved in the weeds of it and the intricacies of it. So if you, like let's say the father is just coming in from the outside and you're trying to micromanage the way that your wife is dealing with the children, that's a bad idea, right? Because you're not there, you're not in the weeds, you don't see the details, you don't know what she's working with. And so she knows these children in and out more than you do if you're not involved to that degree. Or it could be the opposite. The opposite scenario could be happening, right? And so this is where I think couples need to kind of toss out these issues of these contested, controversial issues. They just kind of come into the household and start causing all this pollution. But rather, just free yourself from these shackles. Because Islam doesn't have these hang-ups. We've inherited these hang-ups from either cultures of origin or from Western societies, right? And then we just bring them and insert them into the relationship. And oftentimes I find these are very easily solvable if you are able to understand the mutual needs of each person, of people within the relationship. Yeah. I think we can end here because we're just about at 10 o'clock pretty much. And inshallah, if there's anybody that wants to chat, we'll be here for a few minutes individually, inshallah.